Okay, hi everybody. Crossed my mind listening to the introduction that some of you know me, but I'm sure that almost all of you went like, Sygnia what? When you heard the company. So just to tell you that, that you are not alone. Force magazine called Sygnia the Delta Force of cybersecurity, observing that the company maintains very low public profiles and has been growing only by direct recommendation. So you're in a good company. My presentation today is also going to be about one such Delta Force operation centered on my betting on nothing less than the future of OT security. And my mission for the coming 30 minutes is to recruit you mentally to my special ops mission. Now, talking about mental recruitment, you know those mentalists that start the show engraving a card in your memory and then picking up that card at the end of the show. So this over there is the card that I'm now engraving in your memory. Memorize it. I'll pick it up at the end of my presentation. I'm going to use the first part of my talk to underpin my position, derive out of it the reasons for what I call our original sin, not only call, I truly believe it is, and from there develop a case for change. And then we'll talk about the future. And I'm going to do that by taking you on a journey of 40 years across the history of OT security in the context of the OT threat landscape. And we start our journey 40 years ago, 1982, with the first ever recorded attack on an ICS environment, widely attributed to the CIA, on the Trans-Siberian natural gas pipeline. The attack was successful, by the way. The pipeline was fractured and then exploded. And then, in the following 40 years, I could see from a bird's eye 3 main transformations of the threat landscape. And I realize that I'm now sort of summarizing my professional career. The first 30 years or so, and mainly after 1995, when Microsoft released the TCP/IP stack as a freebie in Windows, the OT threat landscape was almost entirely dominated by insider threats and by individuals, almost in all cases with direct access into the industrial control environment. So what did we as a professional ecosystem did to protect the industrial enterprise in those days? Well, if an insider can get directly into your process control environment, really the only thing you can do to protect is to go down to the lowest level, improve PLC security, improve protocols, and that's exactly what we did in those years. Now I know that we like to complain a lot, but a lot of good and very important work was done by the instrumentation and process control vendors during those years. For example, the mechanical switch we now see on many controllers between run, program, test modes is a result of that effort, in my opinion, a very important one. Improvement to protocols, adding TCP/IP communication to Modbus in the mid-2000s, another one. So we did a lot of good work. But then the threat landscape transformed pretty much overnight. And that was in mid-2010 with Stuxnet, of course. We woke up to a different landscape, which was dominated almost entirely by nation states, what I like to call the cyber superpowers, whether Unit 74455 in the GRU in Russia, Unit 32 of the NSA here, my Unit 8200 of the IDF in Israel, all busy transforming the threat landscape into what I like to call military-grade cyber weapons. You know, for 10 years, that's what we saw. And that's what we had to protect our industrial enterprise against. Now, to do justice to history, this transformation for some occurred 3 years earlier than that, when CNN aired the footage of the US Department of Homeland Security Project Aurora, which showed in broad daylight a group of researchers in Idaho causing a 2.25 megawatt diesel generator to self-destruct with a cyber attack, a keyboard, and a mouse. But, I'm talking now from personal experience, the following 3 years discussions were merely theoretical in nature and around drawing boards. Of course, this theory turned into sharp reality 3 years later. And then, 2 armies started moving into positions. First, an army of consultants. gearing up to face their clients, tell them about that new and now imminent risk, and obviously, which was true, by the way, and obviously that they know what to do about it. That was less true at the time, but okay. And then another army of tech entrepreneurs gearing up to face their venture capital investors with the same story about the imminent threat and the same conclusion that they know what to develop in technology in order to handle it. They obviously had only a vague idea at the time, but also that is okay. The problem that both armies had, and especially their generals, is that they all came from the relatively well understood world of IT security and didn't know much about the industrial enterprise, about process control. So they were in a desperate need for a framework, preferably scientific, preferably simple, with which they could equip their soldiers going into battle to stand in front of their clients and come across as professional, methodological, and knowledgeable in the field. Then we had a moment of serendipity. When we dug out of the ocean of academic obscurity a model developed 15 years ago, more or less, for a totally different purpose, by the way, but it complied with all the requirements. It's structured, it's methodological, it's scientific, of course, coming from a reputable research university in West Lafayette, Indiana, and it was simple. You can't have it any simpler, right? So we jumped on it and adopted the Purdue Model as our framework for OT security. More than that, as our sole framework for OT security. Two observations came very quickly by observing this original model of Purdue. By the way, that's a picture of the original model. And that was that level 3 and level 4, that may look similar graphically, could be located in different locations, physically. Level 3, as well as level 0 to 2, located on the manufacturing floor and in control rooms. Level 4, in offices, corporate headquarters, maybe in different geographic locations altogether. And that brought about a great idea that because the physical manufacturing sites are physically better protected, if we disconnect these two, yes, you got me, air gap, the ICS and the OT environment, then by the default, we found a solution to the problem. Then we also noticed that there is no internet in this diagram and no enterprise applications. Of course, it was developed in 1992. None of those even existed. And we also saw that it looks very 1990s, right? And so the consultants went on to facelift the Purdue model to make it more new agey. You have to admit, it's exactly the same as what you saw before, but it looks far more professional. This is the Purdue model of 2016. And then we went to do something with our observations. First, you know, this level 2, level 3, level 4 separation. And then we inserted a DMZ between the two, aptly called level 3.5. And later we changed that to IDMZ, perimeter network, names to distinguish it from the IT DMZs, but it is a DMZ. Now, so far, so good. Network separation is key to OT security, really. And so putting a DMZ in the middle is a good way to implement it, even though we sometimes went too far, suggesting that this is proper network segmentation. It's not. It's a separation, but it's an essential one. So far, so good. Then we made a critical mistake. We had to find a place to put the internet in this diagram and the enterprise application. Now, there is nothing in the internet that makes it a property of the higher levels. It was already all over the place. Cloud was king in the making. IoT was already proliferating at exponential rate. And still, for convenience, perhaps, we decided to put it at a new level. We introduced the model, call it level 5, above level 4, and that's critical. And that's where we set the internet. Happy with the model that we developed, then the consultants sat down to write their Bible, the Purdue Bible for the industrial enterprise. First anchoring, the first finding, the separation of level 3 and 4, and the IDMZ concept, came the first commandment. Thou shalt not transfer data directly between level 4 and level 3. And then anticipating the first question we were going to be asked by our clients, we immediately added the second commandment. Thou shalt not use the internet or the manufacturing floor. Obviously, this is a derivative of the first one. The moment we put it level 5, it goes by definition, but we wanted to be crystal clear with our clients. Now, the tech companies saw all this activity by their fellow consultants and knew that they have to abide by the same 2 commandments, but not to be outdone, they decided to quickly add their own commandment. Those shall only operate on-prem. Wow, that's great, but then they look a little deeper and ask themselves, but wait a second. If my universe is limited to level 0 to 3, what the hell can I do? Not much. And up came the 4th commandment. Thou shalt only do intrusion detection systems. Then later they saw that doing intrusion detection in ICS and SCADA environments is far from trivial. Actually, it's very challenging. And they added an addendum to that and asset discovery. And that functionality, very important by its own right, quickly became the best-selling component of the offering until today. Now, point is that doing that, I'm sure that we increased security, we have increased security, but it had detrimental effect for other sides of the business, which we didn't really look. We are security experts. And so anything that had to do with digital transformation, that required communication between level 4 and level 3, now put in jeopardy or at least slowed down immensely. One example I want to use is perhaps the best one, and that is implementation of modern supply chain management techniques or approaches. For as long as pretty much anybody remembers, from the Industrial Revolution until recently, supply chains were managed from left to right. You plan your procurement, you buy raw material, you make your goods, ship and store them in stock, use your sales and marketing power to sell them to the market. That's how it's always been done, and that's best described as what I like to call supply-driven supply chain. Yep. But then in the early 90s, something happened. New communication and new computing technology came about that allowed the industrial enterprise to do something remarkable, to put decision support tools and therefore processes that connect the supply chain in both directions. And that was the basis for a new approach to look at the supply chain. I'm using the one that is close to my heart, the downstream oil supply chain, perhaps the most complex that there is. And the companies went to work on driving the supply chain from the demand side, driving demand signals all the way from the market down to the manufacturing floor and even down to procurement and suppliers. And projects to the tune of tens and hundreds of millions of dollars went about at the end of the 90s and into the 2000 years with the intention to monetize this approach. And just as the company started seeing returns on those massive investments, came we with our Purdue Bible and disconnected the enterprise along the Purdue demarcation lines, making any kind of these kind of initiatives and many more very difficult to achieve. Now, it's not that it's impossible. Of course it's possible, but you need to have very complex architectures in place. This is one that I picked from the ICS cert. I think it's 3-4 years old. I'm sure that there are as many architectures as there are attendees in this room, but they are all singing one song, and that song is complexity. It's complex, it's difficult if you want to implement digital transformation in this world. Problem with timing was that all that happened in a very wrong timing. And the threat landscape we described before has undergone another transformation, bringing it to its current state. And today, the threat to OT is coming actually from the IT, mostly through ransomware. And I know that there are many of you that would say this is not really OT attack. Well, I beg to differ. This is OT attack par excellence. Because at incident response time, that's what we do for a living, the key question is, has there been a cascading effect from the IT down to the OT? Should we halt operation, and how? And that defines an OT event. So the threat landscape now is IT into the OT, and so looking at the two in separation wouldn't work anymore. You need to look at the enterprise as one, and you need to manage security in what I like to call holistic enterprise security across the digital estate, IT and OT. And again, the Purdue Model stands in the way. All that is going to change. And it's going to change for a simple reason. You don't become an executive in ExxonMobil or Shell, to take this is impossible as an answer for too long. At some point, you're going to say, listen, guys, this is what we're going to do, and you tell me how to do it securely. And pressures of this sort started propagating in, discussion started taking place among the professional community, forums started to be formed with alternatives that are looking at revising the whole thing from the ground up, building the ICS environment secured by design, not in word, but in action. One of those, and the one that, in my opinion, has by far the best chances to become the future architecture of industrial control systems, is the one that is offered by OPAF, the Open Process Automation Forum. It's an initiative started by ExxonMobil 6 years ago. Already now it's in its 2.1 release a couple of weeks ago. And at the core, it has edge devices called DCN, distributed control nodes. And those edge devices can do control logic, can do complete control loops, can do the device configuration management, but because it's edge device, they can also implement security. They can collect data, they can do detection. I mean, whatever we want to do at a security layer. So those DCNs, of course, can replace PLCs and DCSs. But in the industry we work in, this is going to be a very long transition period. So a component of the DCS called DCF, Distributed Control Framework, can interface with legacy devices and lend it its communication and security capabilities. All those are collecting data and sending it to a real-time advanced computing platform to do all the data processing, and the communication is happening over a single common bus called the OPA Communication Framework, OCF, which is running OPC UA as the standard. Now, it may not be perfect. We saw it last year with PipeDream, but it's the best we have today. And the beauty is that any other application outside could also communicate with all this, only complying to the OPA standard called OPAS. So that can be the cloud, that can be IoTs, that can be anything. So I know that some of you may sit and say, this is just another theoretical exercise. We've seen many. So think again, guys. And while you think again, check the membership list of OPAF, which is just a very small subset. Today, it counts more than 600 companies. That includes all the oil and gas, chemicals, petrochemical company, all the instrumentation and process control supplier, all the big cloud and software providers, government bodies, regulatory bodies, big universities, all the big consulting firms. Everybody is in there. And think how much cloud these guys will together in the industry. So on top of that, you need to add that it has moved now from theory into practice. Last year, ExxonMobil announced that they're going to turn one of their manufacturing facility to a first true full-scale field trial of the concept, converting it all PLCs, DCS, into an OPAS-compliant environment. And then they chose Yokogawa as their integrator. Now, I know you know the process industry is a very risk-averse bunch, the most risk-averse, but their risk management style is always the same. They wait for some trailblazing enterprise to take the risk and try a new innovation, watch from the sideline, and if they see that it works, they all jump en masse into the play. That's how it's always been, and that's what I believe will happen with OPAS. Exactly the same thing. I said before, I spoke in plural, said that there were forums formed thinking about it with the same mission. I think I'm just briefly mentioning one of them, of NAMUR. NAMUR is a German association of process automation and digitization in the process industry. And they came with very similar framework, perhaps not as developed as OPAF, but the same thing. What I'm telling you is that convergence is already undergoing. Last October, the teams of OPAF and NAMUR already sat together to see how to integrate NAMUR's concept called NOAA into the OPAF framework. So really, it's a matter of time before the two will converge, and therefore I'll continue my talk with the OPAF example. One last word for the US Department of Energy, who came mid-last year, heard it many times this week, with a cyber-informed engineering strategy. For the non-American amongst you, It's a culmination of an effort of 5 years by dozens of domain experts that actually did a very good work in prescribing the cyber-informed strategy guidelines for the energy and other critical infrastructures. Why I'm mentioning it here, because if you read it through, and it's really good to read it, it actually prescribes 5 pillars, going through awareness, education, whatever. The last of them is called future technology or future infrastructure. And if you read it, it actually is a call for exactly the type of work that is done by OPAF and NAMUR. Now, these guidelines are prescriptive, unfortunately. I think that they could have done better. Had it been descriptive, I'm sure that a lot of the concepts I've been discussing for the last 20 minutes would have been in there. Which brings me to my call for action. I truly believe that we, as an ecosystem of OT security professionals, must prioritize partaking in reshaping the future of OT security by contributing to this type of initiatives actively. So I'll do my bit, putting my money where my mouth is, and that is what happened when Sygnia joined OPAF last year. And then our decision to go and build an OPAF-based cyberkinetic innovation center, which is where I want us, and I really mean us in the broader sense, to go and work on, experiment, research, test, and make sure that when the new architectures come about, we bring with it not only the future of OT, but the future of OT security, and be ready with an optimal approach to it. This process is not at all simple and not devoid of challenges. I'll just run quickly through a few of them. There is a challenge at the lower layer. I already told you that. And that is that we need to find a way to smartly wrap legacy devices so that not only they perform and not increase latency in others, but they also do a proper work of security. Diagnostics improve detection and allow better response. Same at the layer of the DCN. We need to do the same, to develop them so that they support better SOC work, better detection and response. Because all of that is going to generate a hell of a lot more data, bringing OT security on par with the amount of data generated by IT security, then we'll need to rethink our concepts for OT-based data lakes and the AI platform needed to process this data. And finally, all that is done for a reason, and the reason is to have better detection and response, so we really need to rethink our concepts of detection and response in OT. The conceptual design we are working with is supposed to address all these 4 challenges by providing kinetic environments with legacy devices worked with DCF, new cyberkinetic devices, or digital twin working with DCNs, all communicating as I described, but the biggest challenge of all is to look how we use all that for better security. So to build a hybrid SOC that will work across the digital estate, IT and OT. And this is currently where we focus our effort. I want to show you where we are in the process so that you can get ready for my mental recruitment. We use as a source our own XDR technology called Velocity, which we already extended by improving the agents, so adding detections now to go fairly deep into the OT space, but we're not yet there. So starting with an XDR that is classic for IT, level 4 and 5 in our Purdue model. We then expanded it to look into level 3, almost all of level 2, but for the lower level detection, we are still relying on IDS, professional IDS, which could connect to APIs. Now that's an intermediary step because this is still not specific for OPAs, right? So the next step is indeed to use the same, but then to expand the XDR capabilities across the digital estate, IT and OT, and for that using the innovation center I just described. When we get there, that will be the point for me to call on you guys to start doing something with it. Because now we can really start doing OT security, and a better one, on a future, on a system that is designed for the future. Which is my point. because I want to leave a few minutes for questions, might want to call on that card that I showed you 25 minutes ago. You remember it? Forget it. This card is really a card of the past. When we are done, when new architecture will make OT secure by design, and we'll have on top of it proper OT security, the new card that we'll have is this card, which will bring OT security to be as agile, at least, if not more, than IT security. Well, I realize, perhaps not as agile as Max and Checo in the Red Bull racing cars. Agree, but you can't have it all. And that really is the future we should strive, as compared to what you now have in your memory from the world we are today with the first card. If you want to read more about it, there is a lot more about it. You are invited to read the blog post that I recently published, either by going to that link or scanning the QR code. And until then, I want to say thank you very much for your attention. And we have a few minutes, so I'll take a few questions if there are. You need to use that microphone, I understand, here in the middle.
Hi, Randy Armstrong with the OPC Foundation. I just wanted to point out that with the pipe dream, the exploit did not affect OPC UA at all. That despite the headlines, it was just being used as
I know.
Well, you made the comment there.
I made the comment which showed that one of the targets was the protocol that we have been describing. I know.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the more important thing is, if you use UA in the way you're planning on doing with OPATH, it's completely immune to the pipe dream attacks.
That's perfect.
Yes.
Right? Thank you very much. This actually is a complementary point to my presentation.
So first a comment. I loved your statement about the two armies. I want to point out that there was a third army involved as well, at least for us. It's an army of auditors. We referred to them as APTs, Audit Persistent Threats. My question is about the DCN. Can you describe the functions of the DCN? What specifically does it do?
You should think it is an I/O and process control component that in principle should do anything that a logic process controller should do, anything that a PLC should do, but built within an edge device. So using the edge device technology, you can put on top of it other applications. But in principle, it should do exactly what the process control component should do.
So it replaces the actual process control.
In the vision of OPATH, it will, and in my vision too. But I know my industry, and it's going to take a very long time before we manage to replace. And therefore, you should look at the DCN as a composition of two internal components. One of them is called DCF, and that's a distributed control framework, and that's designed to be interfacing with the legacy devices and acting as a wrapper around them. So, but that's for the intermediate. That intermediate in the process industry can take 20 years.
And is that going to be extensible, similar to like a firewall or an IDS?
Yes.
Similar sorts of components built
but for that we really need further
device.
discussion, because in our design we also put the firewalls in place and where we want to see them and how you connect the new world and the old world. Definitely.
Okay.
But this really requires a deeper discussion. I'm very happy to take, but not in the time we have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'd like to know what differences XDR provided between OT and IT?
What's the difference?
Difference for OT and for IT?
It's a big question, but if you would ask me what is the main difference, it is, I would say, the attack scenarios that are addressed within it. If you look at an XDR, it's based on scenarios, and those scenarios are currently developed for IT, and a lot of work should be done to turn them into OT, problem number one. Second, today with existing XDR technology, I'm talking about ours, you can cover what I would call the IT within the OT. But not yet going to the lower level. This is why I say intermediately we are still using IDS to provide this data. In an OPAS world, there is no limit. You can, because it's all the same, and you can monitor the whole enterprise. These are the two challenges. But there is many more. The reason is that the fact is that there isn't XDR today, other than what we are using, there isn't XDR for OT yet, because it's not trivial, and the key is understanding the scenarios.
Thank you. I think something different in the response to OT at level 0, level 1. So I think it's big differences in response actions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we are spot on time. Wow. Okay, with pleasure, as long as they're okay with it.
Thank you for the presentation. Just a comment, actually, that the OPAS is based on multiple standards, and the security part of OPAS is actually based on the 62443 standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with the rest
sorry,
of the audience. Thank you.
I wish I had the time to go through the whole complexity. Thank you for that.
Right. So if the asset owners are already implementing 62443, they can easily transfer to this architecture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is why actually they call the standard of standards. It's very presumptuous, but if you look at all the standards that we have today in our aging industry, it's actually a good description. It's going to be a unifying standard. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I enjoyed it.